Insights, streaming now.
The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Newsline Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's bring you up to speed on all the top national and international stories that we're tracking at this hour. The war between Israel and Hamas has now entered the 61st day. Let's get you a complete lowdown on what's happening currently. The fighting has intensified in central and southern Gaza. Israel will turn Gaza into a demilitarized zone after the war. That's what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said. The Israeli military will maintain an indefinite presence in Gaza after the war. That is something that's been reiterated controversially by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Also, no further negotiations on hostage release until Israel halts its offensive in Gaza. That is the latest statement that's been issued by Hamas. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has urged global condemnation of the sexual violence perpetrated by Hamas on Israeli women during the 7th October attacks. As per the latest figures given by the Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza, at least 16,250 people, including more than 7,000 children, have been killed in the war so far. The World Food Programme has said that the catastrophic hunger crisis is intensifying in the Gaza Strip. The Israeli Defense Forces, meanwhile, have issued apologies over the death of a Lebanese soldier in cross-border fire. The Israeli police are investigating sexual crimes by Hamas terrorists who they arrested after the 7th October attacks. The police have cited unnamed eyewitnesses as describing the brutality of the attack at the Nova festival on women and children. The details of the testimonies are too graphic and indicate extreme cases of sexual and gender violence during the attack. Of the 1,200 people killed in the 7th October attacks carried out by Hamas, at least 300 were women. Hamas vigorously denies the allegations of sexual assault or mutilation by members of its armed wing. The police say their goal is to try every suspect who they have in custody. A UN Commission of Inquiry is now investigating war crimes on both sides of the Israel-Hamas conflict. It will probe these allegations of sexual assaults as well. Israel has criticized the United Nations for remaining silent on this issue. Displaced and distraught Gazans in Khan Yunis were seen leaving the southern city on Tuesday, heading south to Rafah to seek shelter from further Israeli attacks. Many Gazans have been displaced for a second or third time since the war began on the 7th of October.
We are getting ready to leave Khan Yunis, heading to Rafah. We have been here for about 50 days. At the end of the day, civilian residents seek safety, and you have children and old people. There is no safe place. Even official authorities or official sites in the war have said there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. But at the end, we head to wherever we think there might be a bit of safety.
A World Health Organization official in Gaza said on Tuesday the situation was deteriorating by the hour as Israeli bombing has intensified in the south of the Palestinian enclave. Israeli forces have said they've tightened the noose around southern Gaza's main city of Khan Yunis in what they call the most intense day of combat in the 5 weeks of ground operations against the Hamas terrorists. In what appeared to be the biggest ground assault in Gaza since the truce with Hamas unraveled last week, Israel has said its troops have reached the heart of Khan Yunis and have surrounded the city.
עברנו בימים האחרונים לשלב השלישי של התמרון, השתלטנו על מעוזים רבים של החמאס בצפון הרצועה. כעת אנחנו פועלים מול מרכזי הכובד שלו בדרום. אנחנו פועלים במקצועיות, מפנים את האוכלוסייה מבעוד מועד מאזורי הקרבות, תוקפים את החמאס מעל ומתחת לקרקע בתקיפות משולבות מהאוויר, מהים ומהיבשה. שואלים אותנו הרבה על ההרס בעזה. חמאס הוא הכתובת, סינואר הוא הכתובת. הכוחות שלנו מוצאים ממש כמעט בכל בית אמצעי לחימה, בבתים רבים מוצאים מחבלים, נלחמים בהם. אנחנו מבינים שחלק מהשיטה, אמל"ח מונח בבתים, מחבל מגיע לבית בבגדים אזרחיים ומנהל משם את הלחימה. הלחץ הצבאי שאנחנו מפעילים והפעלנו בשבועות האחרונים פוגע בחמאס פגיעה קשה ומקדם את ההשגה של כל מטרות המלחמה, ובכלל זה גם את המטרה העליונה של השבת החטופים הביתה. צה"ל על כל מפקדיו, על כל חייליו, עוסק כל כולו בהשגת מטרות המלחמה. אנחנו, כל חיילי צה"ל, נעשה הכל לתקן את שנפגע. בשביל החיים, בשביל המשכיות החיים במדינת ישראל, התיקון הזה הוא הכרחי. אנחנו לא נעצור עד שנשלים את המשימה.
The Gazan Health Ministry has claimed that at least 43 people have been killed in Khan Yunis since the 5th of December following Israeli strikes. Hospitals in Khan Yunis are on the brink of collapse. The Gazan Health Ministry spokesperson Ashraf Al-Qudra says patients are now on the floor. Hospitals in South Gaza, according to him, have run out of life-saving service. A World Health Organization official in Gaza said the situation was deteriorating by the hour as Israeli bombing had intensified in southern Gaza. Palestinian rocket hit a residential building in the Israeli city of Ashkelon on the 5th of this month. The Israel's ambulance service said 2 women over the age of 60 suffered minor injuries in the attack. Hamas terrorists continue to fire rockets into Israel as Israeli forces launched a counter-offensive in the southern Gaza Strip. In what is being called as the biggest ground assault since the truce collapsed last week, Gaza residents have said Israeli tanks have entered the eastern parts of Khan Yunis for the first time. The Israeli army on Tuesday released fresh footage showing various aerial attacks against Hamas as the forces intensify their air and ground attacks in the Gaza Strip. The aerial footage showed airstrikes of what the Israeli army claimed was Hamas infrastructure, including a tunnel shaft and command centers. Israeli troops were also seen on the ground in Gaza. The Israeli military fired artilleries at Gaza from positions on the border in southern Israel as their forces launched an operation in the southern Gaza Strip. The Israelis who seized the northern half of Gaza last month before pausing for the week-long truce say they're now extending their ground campaign to the rest of the enclave to fulfill their objective of annihilating its Hamas rulers. In what appeared to be the biggest ground assault since the collapsed truce last week, residents said Israeli tanks had entered the eastern parts of Khan Yunis for the first time, crossing from the Israeli border fence and advancing west. Israel expects difficult fighting in the new phase of its war in Gaza, but is open to constructive feedback, it says, on reducing harm to civilians as long as the advice is consistent with its aim of destroying Hamas. 17 Thai nationals who had been held hostage by Hamas in Gaza have arrived in Bangkok. The group is among 23 Thai hostages who have so far been released from Gaza. 9 still remain in captivity.
This little girl and her grandmother have just had the best news. The girl's father was one of the 10 Thai hostages recently released by Hamas. This house is why he was in Israel. He paid for it with money he earned there.
The house was almost finished. Everything was paid for. And my husband was installing the bathroom when we got the news our son had been abducted. So we stopped everything until now.
Witawa Gonlawung returned just a few days after the attack. He's home and he's safe, but can't sleep without pills. He was working in a poultry farm near Gaza on October 7th. A Hamas terrorist attacked him.
He stabbed me several times and cut me in the head. And then I grabbed the knife and broke it. We kept fighting for a long time until I lost consciousness.
Now he's recovering back on the family farm. Despite his injuries, he says working in Israel was worth the risk. He earned about €1,000 a month there, 4 times the Thai minimum wage. The pull that kind of money exerts is clear here at the Udon Thani Labor Department. Many of these people are applying to work abroad. Numbers are down a little, but are expected to pick up soon. Around 3,000 locals are still working in Israel.
The salary they get abroad is so high. Even if people have higher education, many will still choose to work abroad and work on farms.
This woman's eldest son was one of those working on an Israeli farm. He was killed in the Hamas attack. His younger brothers are also working abroad in Taiwan, sending money back to the family.
I don't want to send any of my children abroad, but we have no choice. We're a poor farming family here, and if they want to go, I won't stop them.
Despite his experience in Israel, Witawa Gonlawung is thinking about going abroad again for work. He started building a house, but has no more money and no job here. He'll likely leave again for work, but says next time he'll go somewhere else.
Even as the United States continues to defend him, Khalistani terrorist Gurpat Vant Singh Pannun has reportedly issued yet another threat to India, this time to target the Indian Parliament. In a video statement that featured Parliament attack convict Afzal Guru, Pannun said he would shake the foundations of the Indian Parliament. The statement comes ahead of the anniversary of the 2001 Parliament attack. Now, this is the same man who's being defended by the US. Top American officials have taken up his cause with India in recent days. The US recently indicted an Indian national for an alleged foiled plot to kill Pannun on American soil. One can't have a clearer example of Western hypocrisy on terrorism. Pannun is openly advocating terrorism from American soil, yet he's being defended and not put behind bars where he should be. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has secured the 32nd spot on the Forbes list of the world's most powerful women. She's been recognized for her significant impact on politics and policy in India. HCL Corporation CEO Roshni Nadar Malhotra, Steel Authority of India Chairperson Soma Mandal and Biocon founder Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw are the other women on the Indian women on the list. The top positions are held by European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen, followed by Christine Lagarde of the European Central Bank and US Vice President Kamala Harris. Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as Moscow courts allies abroad despite being isolated over the Ukraine conflict. Putin has limited his international travel since deploying troops to Ukraine. The International Criminal Court had earlier issued an arrest warrant for Putin on the war crime accusation of unlawfully deporting Ukrainian children. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters that President Putin would go on a working visit to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Under mounting international sanctions, Russia and Iran have signed an agreement to make joint efforts to counter Western sanctions. Both nations have found themselves increasingly isolated on the global stage due to their destabilizing actions. Notably, only a handful of countries, including pariah states like North Korea and Eritrea, stood by Russia following its invasion of Ukraine. The United States, the European Union and other allies responded to Russia's actions with a barrage of sanctions, making Russia one of the most heavily sanctioned countries globally. The impact on the Russian economy has been palpable, with the ruble experiencing a sharp decline. After over 21 months of Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine, intense battles persist without a clear resolution as neither faction has decisively impacted the battlefield. Ukrainians hoped 2023 would be the year the country would drive Russian forces out of swaths of occupied land, but the front line has barely budged. Here's a report.
More than 21 months into the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II, fierce fighting rages in Ukraine with no end in sight. Ukrainians hoped 2023 would be the year the country drove Russian forces out of swathes of occupied land. But the front line has barely budged. Reuters Ukraine chief correspondent Thomas Barmforth.
The main takeaway of the year is probably that there haven't been a great deal of advances by either side during the war.
The war in Ukraine has already killed or wounded hundreds of thousands of people, destroyed cities and villages, forced millions from their homes, and placed hundreds of thousands more under the Russian occupation. Kiev's much anticipated counter-offensive has so far proved unable to punch through Russian defensive lines in the south and east.
Russia controls about 17.5% of Ukrainian territory. Russian forces are back on the offensive in the east, and they've been mounting pressure on the town of Avdiivka. Many of the Ukrainian soldiers are exhausted, and many of them have been fighting out at the front for almost 2 years. Ukraine's own commander-in-chief has already described the war as at a stalemate. President Zelensky has rejected that characterization, but it really does look very hard to imagine that either side could quickly forge a breakthrough and change things very quickly on the battlefield.
Ukrainians know they must secure Western military aid to carry on, and that it will be harder with the war in Gaza distracting global attention.
It's clear that there is increasing fatigue in the West on the matter of providing military and other support to Ukraine. The White House has asked Congress to approve a roughly $60 billion assistance program for Ukraine that would come through next year. At the moment, it hasn't passed.
Meanwhile, in Europe, a 4-year, €20 billion EU military aid proposal has also run into resistance from some bloc members. Some Ukrainians believe Russian leader Vladimir Putin will use any let-up in fighting to build further defences and regenerate the Russian army for a new assault.
Russia is expected to hold an election in March that is widely expected to hand Vladimir Putin another 6 years in the Kremlin. Some observers think that he may feel his hands are more untied after that election to escalate his war effort. That could include, for instance, mobilizing more Russian men to fight in the army. He may also decide to invest even more effort into the defense industry in Russia.
The strain of the war is likely to weigh on everyday Ukrainians, for many of whom war fatigue has become a fact of life.
I spoke to an internally displaced person from Kherson. His name is Oleksiy. He fled his hometown of Kherson in April 2022 when it was still under occupation. He's now currently living in Kiev, and he has no plan to go back home to Kherson because he fears that it's still getting pounded by artillery, and he thinks that it's too dangerous. I think there's a lot of frustration, a lot of fatigue, and also a sense that it's going to be a long time until anything goes back to anything resembling normal. Currently, if everything stays as it is, doesn't look like Russian forces have any appetite for peace talks. The Ukrainians themselves, their official position is that they want all of their country back, every single inch of occupied territory to be returned to Ukraine. And their position is that peace talks cannot take place until Russia has left their territory. So it really does seem that neither side is ready for peace talks, and therefore it seems unlikely that the war is going to end anytime soon.
US President Joe Biden's pressing efforts to restock Ukraine's resources and provide aid to Israel faces imminent collapse in the Senate. Republicans are poised to block the funding today unless Democrats concede to incorporating stringent measures aimed at curbing migration along the US-Mexico border. A classified briefing convened by administration officials to garner support spiraled into a partisan confrontation on Tuesday afternoon. Republicans vehemently accused Democrats of disregarding their border control demands, leading to a heated exchange. 6 Ukrainian children taken by Russia in the wake of Moscow's invasion will be reunited with their families after Qatari mediation. That's what officials from the Gulf state have said. Russia has been accused of forcibly deporting thousands of Ukrainian children from schools, hospitals and orphanages in parts of the country controlled by its forces. The children between the ages of 8 and 15 are the second group of minors to be returned via Qatar's embassy in Moscow through a Doha-mediated deal between Russia and Ukraine, which saw 4 being returned in October. As the Russia-Ukraine war rages on, there is a growing movement in Russia wherein women are demanding the return of their husbands, sons and brothers who were mobilized following President Putin's decree in September last year. Maria Andreeva is among those leading this movement. Here's a report.
Maria Andreeva's husband has been fighting in Ukraine for more than a year, but she's waging her own battle in Moscow to get him home. And she's not alone. An increasing number of Russian women are demanding the return of their husbands, sons and brothers from the front line. They were mobilized following a decree by President Vladimir Putin in September last year. Hundreds of thousands of young men rushed to leave Russia. Millions did not, and some of them were called up to fight.
We want our men to be demobilized, to bring them back home to us, because we believe that in a year they have done all they could for the front, and even more that was required of them. They are civilians. First of all, they're losing their skills. They're losing their health, both physical and psychological.
Since Andreeva's husband was mobilized, he's only been back for 2 short breaks to see his wife and young daughter. Andreeva says this is insufficient for a soldier fighting in a conflict.
Just so my daughter understands that you can play with that dad is nearby, that dad rocks her in the evening. You see, her dad is very involved and has been so right from the beginning. And it's very hard for her without her dad. And then boom, here we go again.
As part of their demonstrations, they're aiming right at the top.
We are trying to get through the direct line with the president. Then we will think further. Solitary protests, something like putting stickers on cars so that they don't forget about us. We will put prints on clothing. Do everything possible to attract attention to the problem. We will also try to interact with the media. Many girls already want to, are ready, are trying.
Tackling the movement is a delicate matter for the Kremlin. Moscow sent tens of thousands of troops to Ukraine in February 2022. In previous wars, it has tolerated higher death tolls than would be politically palatable in Western countries. But the growing movement of Russian women emphasises the complexity and inequality of keeping so many men at war for so long, especially while many more of fighting age remain at home. Women in Ukraine have also demanded their men be allowed back from the front. Andreeva says Russia's defence ministry has barely engaged with the women. The ministry did not respond to a Reuters request for comment. Andreeva told Reuters the second her husband is snoring next to her in bed, she will end her protests. Reuters did not seek or receive any military or other potentially sensitive information from Andreeva.
At a recent Fox News town hall, former US President Donald Trump made a bold statement regarding potential leadership if re-elected. Trump assured he would not operate as a dictator, but intriguingly hinted at a firm stance except for day one, suggesting a different approach if granted another term. It's not clear if he meant that statement to be a promise, a quip or a threat. Seeking clarification, Trump further stressed he aimed to close the border. The remarks may have been an attempt to defuse an issue that has bubbled up in recent weeks, with various news outlets spotlighting an authoritarian bent of Trump's proposed second-term approach.
Well, I think somebody gave him a talking point. They thought that would sound good. And then you hear the talking points. That's the only thing they're good at, cheating on elections and great talking points. They say, we want to run against Trump. They want to run. Well, we did really well in 2016, and we did so much better in 2020. The person they don't want to run against is us. It's us. It's not me. It's us. Because it's a movement, the likes of which this country, Sean, has never seen before. By the way, it was okay for him to say that. He said, I'd like to take him behind that. He could say that, and everyone thought it was so cute. If I ever said it, they'd say, he's a dictator. He's a horrible human being. You know, it's a whole double standard we have.
President Biden launched a fundraising blitz showcasing the Democratic Party's star power and anticipated to generate millions of US dollars. The sprint encompassed at least 9 fundraisers throughout the month, kicking off on Tuesday in Boston, where Biden hosted 3 events, culminating in an evening concert by James Taylor. The president was using a trio of fundraisers to caution against what might happen should his predecessor once again claim control of the White House, noting that Trump has described himself as his supporters' retribution and has vowed to root out, quote-unquote, vermin in the country. President Biden had responded to Donald Trump cautioning that democracy was more at risk in 2024 and informing donors that the former president and his allies were determined to destroy democratic institutions in America. President Biden expressed uncertainty about running for re-election if Donald Trump were not a candidate in 2024, emphasizing the importance of preventing Trump from winning for the country's sake. Biden highlighted the heightened risk to democracy in the upcoming election and referred to himself as running against an election denier-in-chief. Biden made these remarks during a fundraising event for the 2024 campaign in the Boston area.
Would you be running for president if Trump wasn't running?
I expect so, but look, he is running, and I have to run.
A 58-year-old American man was arrested in Arizona by the FBI in connection with the religiously motivated killing of 2 police officers and a 3rd person in rural Australia last year. The attackers, relatives Garrett Stacey and Nathaniel Train, engaged in an hours-long gun battle with the police before they eventually were shot dead. The man from Arizona was arrested on the 1st of December for allegedly sending extremist Christian materials online to the attackers who carried out the shooting. Listen in to what the authorities have said about the arrest.
We know that the offenders executed a religiously motivated terrorist attack in Queensland. They were motivated by a Christian extremist ideology and subscribed to the broad Christian fundamentalist belief system. The motivation of the United States national is still under investigation by the FBI. The attack involved advanced planning and preparation against law enforcement.
The FBI has a long memory and an even longer reach. From Queensland, Australia, to the remote corners of Arizona, the FBI and the QPS worked jointly and endlessly to bring this man to justice.
Guyanese President Irfan Ali has said the Venezuelan referendum about a disputed territory between the 2 countries is a direct threat to Guyana. Venezuela, in a referendum, rejected the International Court of Justice's jurisdiction over the oil-rich Essequibo region.
The measures announced are in blatant disregard of the order given by the International Court of Justice on December 1st, 2023. Guyana views this as an imminent threat to its territorial integrity and will intensify precautionary measures to safeguard its territory.
Guyana has administered Essequibo for over a century. The region makes up more than two-thirds of its territory and is home to one-fourth of Guyana's population. Guyana views Venezuelan incursions as an existential threat and have vowed to remain very vigilant of any further developments. In preparation for the Paris 2024 Olympic Games, the Paris Police bomb disposal team is collaborating with event organizers to determine the appropriate level of bomb clearing measures during next year's Olympics and Paralympics in the French capital. On Monday, the bomb disposal squad responded to an abandoned piece of luggage at a train station, which they subsequently detonated. Later, another unattended bag was reported in a park, eventually identified as belonging to a school student. The frequency of bomb alerts has increased, with incidents reported at tourist attractions such as the Louvre Museum and the Versailles Palace in the weeks following the 7th October Hamas attacks in Israel. China's foreign ministry has said its visa-free travel policy, which came into effect since the 1st of December and has shown positive results. Approximately 7,000 to 18,000 travelers from France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain and Malaysia entered China in the first 3 days of December.
China says travellers have returned to the country in greater numbers this month. A brand new policy has helped. Visitors from a select group of countries were allowed to enter the country visa-free from December 1st. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin.
To facilitate cross-border travel and China's high-quality development and opening up, China started to extend visa-free policy to 6 European countries, including France and Germany, on December 1st. This policy has produced positive effects.
He further said about 18,000 travellers from the selected countries entered China in the first 3 days of the month. He said about 7,000 used the visa waiver. Those countries include France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain and Malaysia. China said daily average tourist numbers from those states have risen by 39% on the first 3 days of December compared to the last day of November. Germany hopes the visa-free travel won't stop there. The country's ambassador to China expressed hope it would extend the measures to all European Union members.
6 colonial-era artifacts returned to Sri Lanka by the Netherlands were showcased at the Colombo National Museum on Tuesday. The artifacts were returned following an agreement in August between the two countries. The colonial artifacts include the bejeweled cannon of candy made of bronze, silver and gold, seized in 1765 by soldiers of the Dutch East Company. It used to be displayed in the Prince of Orange's cabinet of rarities and later the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Residents on a Japanese island close to Taiwan are worried they would be unable to cope with an influx of refugees if conflict between China and Taiwan were to break out. Yonaguni Island's officials say their plea for help to the Tokyo government has gone unheard.
This disaster drill is meant to prepare for crisis on Japan's westernmost frontier, be it a natural disaster or, as island mayor Kenichi Itakatsu increasingly worries, a humanitarian one. Yonaguni Island recently ran this exercise with Japan's self-defense forces, bracing both for tsunami and the event of the island's close neighbor, Taiwan, coming under attack from China.
I'm worried about what could happen. It's a situation that we cannot predict.
Yonaguni is only about 60 miles east of Taiwan, a self-ruled island of 24 million people. China claims it as its own territory and has ratcheted up simulated missile strikes and other military displays. Yonaguni residents say they worry about a possible refugee crisis if conflict broke out nearby. Japan has earmarked $290 billion for defense this year, the biggest build-up since the Second World War. But more than 24 current and former Japanese officials and island residents said there was no plan from Tokyo for Yonaguni, where they imagine hundreds if not thousands of refugees could try to flee.
What if they come here? What if they come here? I asked the government. There was no answer. Everyone was silent. It's like their mouths were taped shut.
Yonaguni has around 1,700 residents. Koji Sugama, the official in charge of preparing the island for disasters, thinks right now there wouldn't be enough emergency supplies if the worst comes to pass. This container is one of 3 on the whole island. Sugama says each one can support around 800 people.
These are cookies made from rice. Then there's curry pilaf, tomato risotto, corn pilaf, mixed rice. This will do for 1, maybe 2 days.
Yonaguni relies on bi-weekly ferry and a handful of daily flights from nearby islands for supplies, but these can often be cancelled due to bad weather. So far, the Japanese government's response to rising tension in the Asia-Pacific has focused on military spending, which Prime Minister Fumio Kishida plans to double in the next 5 years.
If something happens, I really have no idea how the Prime Minister at the time will act, what decisions they will take, or even be able to take.
Forest City was an ambitious residential project in Malaysia, but it's failed to draw residents. Buyers are shying away from the development because Chinese developer Country Garden is behind it. Here's the story.
Is this a green futuristic metropolis or a ghost town literally built on sand? Forest City is located in Johor, a state in southern Malaysia, but so far it's a city without people. The huge $100 billion residential project was built entirely on an artificial island, just a stone's throw away from the expensive real estate market of neighboring Singapore. It aims to house 700,000 people by 2035.
There's 3 clusters in here. Totally there's 4 clusters. Okay, 3 clusters in here, and the other main cluster in the other side. Okay.
This Malaysian pensioner, who wants to be referred to as Mr. Lim, is one of its few residents. He bought 2 units from Chinese investors after the public learned that the private Chinese developer behind Forest City, Country Garden, had run into financial difficulties. Many first-time buyers wanted to sell. So far, the majority of the 28,000 apartments that have been completed in Forest City have been sold, but hardly any of the owners have moved in. Mr. Lim is confident that this will change with the expansion of the city.
It's 60% owned by the Country Garden, 40% actually, that owned by the Johor. That the local government, correct, including the Sultan. It's not totally owned by Country Garden. So in that sense, that they feel that this one is still quite have potential. So that's why they still keep well maintained. But the keyword is well maintained.
Wherever you go in Forest City, you will come across dozens of gardeners, but most apartments are empty and seem to be nothing more than an investment for buyers. To lure more residents to the island, an entire area has been declared a duty-free zone. But experts say this is not enough. Forest City needs to attract people who want to live there.
When there's no people moving, there's no demand for facility, amenity, no commercial unit or no shopping mall, no retail will move into this city, then this city is incomplete without people.
A look at night reveals the problem. To stimulate more economic activity, the Malaysian government announced a plan to create a special financial zone in Forest City. This tower is reserved exclusively for companies, generating jobs that the local population can theoretically profit from.
Well, of course, it's good for Malaysia because it attracts investment from other countries like Singapore, China, and other Asian countries.
It would be a shame if the place has to close down. I come here with the children, and it's nice to play here.
The real threat to the inhabitants of Forest City is not in the sea. Country Garden is currently among the world's most indebted developers. So far, only 15% of their dream has been realized. Much more investment is needed to keep it alive.
Bangladesh's most important export sector is the textile industry, but workers say they are paid far too little and are taking to the streets in protest. The country's minimum wage commission has announced an increase in about $110 a month. This was announced on the 7th of November, but the workers and union leaders are demanding more than $200.
Angry garment workers have been protesting on the streets of Dhaka, Bangladesh, for the last couple of weeks. They are fighting for higher wages and feel let down by politicians. We've come to the streets so that the government solves the crisis and helps us survive. Taslima took part in the protests because she's worried about the nutrition and education of her children, as she can't match the living costs with her income. The price of everything has risen. We can't manage. The house rent has been increased. We're suffering. That's why we're demanding a minimum monthly wage of 23,000 takas. That's 210 US dollars. More than 4 million people, mostly women, work in Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry, the country's main export sector. The minimum monthly wage garment workers earn is the lowest in the world. Because of inflation and skyrocketing costs of everyday goods, workers are struggling to make ends meet. Their wages barely cover living expenses for half a month. Bangladesh's garment factories generate nearly 85% of the country's exports, amounting to $55 billion annually. But factory owners say they can't do more.
COVID-19, the war in Ukraine and now in Gaza, these three factors have pushed the whole world into a recession. We see sales are down, so orders here are low too. So we formed a wage board and fixed the minimum monthly wage at about $115. A salary increase of 56% is no joke.
In this conflict, the workers don't receive any support from the government. Taslima does not understand why the state is taking action against workers like herself. She believes her demands are justified. We're only demanding better wages. We're not committing any crimes. We're not thieving or robbing. So why do they torture us? Unrest in the garment industry means unrest in the country's overall economy. It's unclear how the conflict will end, especially for the workers.
The World Meteorological Organization has reported that the decade spanning 2011 to 2020 marked the warmest period ever recorded in history. Despite increased economic losses due to extreme weather and climate events during this time, it surprisingly saw the lowest number of deaths from such occurrences. According to the Decadal State of the Climate 2011-2020 report released by the WMO, the rate of climate change escalated significantly, resulting in record high temperatures. This report offers a longer-term perspective and complements the WMO's annual State of Global Climate reports. During COP28, the WMO also released a provisional annual report for 2023, indicating that 2023 is poised to become the warmest year on record.
In terms of the global temperature, this decade is the warmest ever. It's 1.1 degrees Celsius average 10-year period, and it's every previous decade was also warmer than the preceding ones, and the amount of the natural disasters and weather and climate extremes, which we also monitor as a part of this state of climate, is again raises lots of concerns for us.
Biting Arctic conditions gripped vast areas of Russia on Tuesday, plunging Siberia into bone-chilling temperatures of minus 58 degrees Celsius. Yakutsk, one of the world's coldest cities, which lies 5,000 kilometers east of Moscow, was covered in freezing clouds and fog. That's what this drone footage shows. Siberia experienced lows of minus 50 degrees Celsius on Tuesday, as we said. Moscow was engulfed by unprecedented snowfall, causing flight disruptions and blizzard conditions. The frigid temperatures dropping to minus 50 degrees have become less frequent due to climate change, evidenced by the thawing of permafrost in recent years. Methane, even though it's invisible and odorless, poses a more significant threat than carbon dioxide, playing a major role in global warming as highlighted by climate experts. Despite its usefulness, methane stands out as a powerful greenhouse gas with 28 times the heat-trapping potency of carbon dioxide over a century. Since industrialization and intensified farming, methane concentrations have surged by over 150%. Globally, the United Nations underscores that methane emissions contribute to roughly 20% of the warming observed since the pre-industrial era. Recent studies stress that reducing methane emissions is pivotal in keeping global warming below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial times, crucial to lessening the severe impacts of climate change.
Tackling methane is among the most important, if not the most important, thing that can be done limit the near-term warming.
We cannot see it because methane is colorless, of course, and you can detect it via infrared spectroscopy, which means that there are some part of the solar spectrum which is absorbed by methane, which we cannot see in the infrared. So that's what that camera is catching. So it can catch what we cannot see with our human eye.
What do our numbers show in this year's global methane tracker? They show that there is some improvement in terms of methane emissions, but emissions are not falling fast enough, and not even close to that. And this is happening at a time when we have seen natural gas prices being at very high levels.
Super emitters, large spewing effects, the ones that get detected by satellites, there are no excuses for that. Then you have all the fugitive emissions, the smaller leaks, and it's just thousands of leaks across the facilities that are hundreds of square kilometers. How far do you drive that down? That is, I think, where you need that proper data at that facility level coming back to the forcing mechanism. And that's where you need that availability so that competition kicks in, basically.
Southern Germany, including Bavaria's capital Munich, is grappling with heavy snowfall. The snowfall has disrupted services such as tram services as snow has covered the tracks. Residents in affected areas could be seen using shovels to clear paths to their garage entrances. In the Frankfurt suburb of Kelkheim, road rescue workers deployed a crane to lift an overturned truck that skidded into the shoulder of an icy country road. Air quality monitoring authorities say since March, Tehran has experienced only 9 days of clean air due to severe air pollution across the Iranian capital. School children and certain government employees have been instructed to remain at home. The red warning for hazardous air quality extends to cities beyond Tehran, affecting communities nationwide. The governor's office has urged vulnerable groups such as children, the elderly and pregnant women to avoid outdoor activities and exercise to minimize health risks. General Motors Cruise robo-taxi unit could face fines and sanctions over its failure to disclose details of a 2nd October accident in which a robo-taxi dragged a pedestrian 20 feet after being struck by another vehicle, says a California agency.
General Motors could face a big fine over an accident involving one of its Cruise robo-taxis. The October incident in California saw a pedestrian dragged for 20 feet by one of the vehicles. Now the state's Public Utilities Commission says Cruise could face fines of $1.5 million. There may be additional sanctions over the firm's initial failure to disclose all details of the accident. Last month, the agency said that Cruise took 2 weeks to supply the full video of the event. Separately, GM Chief Executive Mary Barra said Monday that the company's review of the incident would last into the first quarter of next year. She said she was focused on righting the ship at the unit. But analysts say the prospect of fines and other penalties could delay efforts to rebuild trust and restart operations. Cruise suspended all driverless car trips in the US following the accident. The unit's chief executive and chief product officer both stepped down. GM says it has hired a law firm to examine management's handling of the accident and their response to regulators. One investor told Reuters that it would take many months to rebuild trust and resolve the issue.
Elon Musk's AI venture aims to raise $1 billion through an equity offering, as disclosed in a filing with US regulators. Elon's AI project, launched in July this year, holds ambitious objectives of comprehending the universe. Musk touts its intent to be maximally curious while maintaining caution regarding the potential risks associated with the technology.
Elon Musk's artificial intelligence startup is set to raise $1 billion through an equity offering. That's according to a filing with US regulators on Tuesday. XAI launched in July this year with some pretty big goals, understanding the universe no less. Musk says his AI will be maximally curious, though he also continues to warn about the dangers posed by the technology.
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. We will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human.
Fundraising for AI projects remains a bright spot for startups this year. Among other deals, ChatGPT maker OpenAI secured $10 billion from major backer Microsoft. XAI last month launched its own chatbot dubbed Grok to rival ChatGPT and others. Musk has criticized competing products from big tech firms like Google as being riddled with censorship. His startup will be integrated into social network X, which he also owns, and available as a standalone app. The team behind it comes from Google's DeepMind unit and other top tech names.
Nvidia is working closely with the US government to ensure new chips for the Chinese market are compliant with export curbs. The firm has commanded more than 90% of China's $7 billion market for AI chips, but analysts say the latest US curbs create an opportunity for rivals to muscle in.
Nvidia is working with the US government to ensure its latest chips comply with controls on exports to China. That's according to Chief Executive Jensen Huang on Wednesday. The firm has commanded more than 90% of China's $7 billion market for AI chips. But analysts say the latest US curbs create an opportunity for rivals to muscle in. Huang didn't comment on earlier Reuters reports that his company was delaying the launch of new chips especially crafted for China. He would only say that Nvidia was working closely with Washington to ensure its products complied with the export controls. When posting its November earnings, the chipmaker warned that it expects a steep drop in fourth quarter sales to China as a result of the restrictions. Huang noted that the country normally accounts for about a fifth of Nvidia sales, but he didn't say what the new number might be. He described Chinese tech giant Huawei as a formidable rival. Separately, Huang said Nvidia was in talks with Singapore about a big investment there. The city-state has been developing its own AI model, dubbed Sea Lion.
Well, that's a wrap on the show. If you have been, thanks so much for watching, but stay tuned to News 9 Live for the latest news updates.
They picked my husband. He was tortured there for 2 years. He was enforced disappeared. We had no idea where he is. Within 15 minutes, we got the information that the whole area is surrounded by Pakistan Army. I came out from that in disguise, and after 5 to 6 hours, I was in Kandahar. I don't have any message for Pakistan. There is no politician in Pakistan. They are puppets of Pakistan Army.
Streaming now. This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Hello everyone, Namaskar. I'm music composer Ricky Cage. 3-time Grammy Award winner and a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador. And you're watching me on First Person on News 9 Plus.
This and more streaming now on the world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now.
Do you know how many students left India last year? Take a wild guess. More than 7 lakh students. That's more than the population of a small state like Sikkim. These students spent more than 40,000 crore rupees on their education. That's more than 65 times the 600 crore budget of India's Chandrayaan 3 mission. So what's driving students away from India?
My name is Hia. I just gave my 12th board examinations in 2022.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm an economist by profession.
Just finished my first year of bachelor's in America.
My name is Sandhya Agarwal. I am living in Delhi for the past 1 year because of my post-graduation, which I am pursuing from Jamia Millia Islamia.
For the past year and a half, I've been in the US working with research organizations.
And I study psychology with neuroscience. I'm doing a double major.
And I'm now going to start a PhD in economics in the US.
It was my final semester when the COVID happened. So I had planned since 2018 that I will go immediately either US or UK.
Psychology is definitely offered in India, but when I was researching for programs or degrees or colleges, I realized there are a lot more unnecessary battles in becoming a psychologist in India, such as something I feel which is as bare minimum as internships or experience in this field are required to be paid.
I always knew I wanted to do research, and as much as I know about the Indian research ecosystem, specifically with social sciences, it seemed it was better to be abroad for that, for multiple reasons. One is the teaching or the curriculum is more focused at teaching here, but they weren't evaluated on their research qualifications as such. Whereas in the US or the UK, where I pursued my master's, the incentives are completely different, where they do not focus on teaching, but focus more on what is the research output of the professor.
As compared to India, there's more practical approach there. You are allowed to do things beyond your course.
I definitely feel there's a lot more variety and flexibility. You can add more